Sins of the Gilded. Coyotes howl neath the blood-red moon. Midas weeps in a cold saloon. Chapter 1. In the heart of a dusty town named Granger stood the Placer's Fill, a weathered tavern with a story etched into its time-worn wooden walls. It was a dry summer in the small town, with desert winds whipping up in the late afternoon, blowing a current of red sand through the main road. The Auburn Sheriff's building trembled as the crimson grit battered its shutters, while the old tavern's wooden sign, suspended by iron chains, swung violently against the backdrop of a tin roof. Throughout the town, every door and window remained locked and sealed from the inside, with tea towels and undone laundry crammed into any gaps in the hope of warding off the intrusive sandstorm. Behind the bar at the Placer's Fill, a middle-aged man with slicked-back hair and a thin mustache expertly poured glasses of whiskey with one hand, while nonchalantly undoing his top button with the other. The atmosphere inside was humid, and the patrons, weary of being cooped up, had grown increasingly apathetic with each sip of their chilled drinks. A dark oak pool table, unoccupied and awaiting action, stood at the center of the room, its shiny balls neatly arranged in a triangle at one end, with a piece of blue chalk resting idly on the other. Midas inherited the Placer's Fill from his father, a legacy passed down through generations. Remarkably, Granger was once even smaller than its current size. Legend has it that Granger began as a camp, a group of lost cowboys setting up a temporary site for the night. As the sun illuminated the horizon the next morning, they witnessed the ground shimmering around them as if it, too, was ablaze. The ensuing gold rush was swift and turbulent, drawing fortune-seekers from all corners. One such individual was Gordon Ulrich. Each day, Gordon would emerge from his tent and make his way to the nearby stream, joining others in anticipation of his placer tray filling with gold. Evenings concluded with him sharing his flask of whiskey with those who, like him, were yet to strike gold. Tiring of this routine, Gordon decided to focus on the one certainty in the budding town. At the end of each day, men returned from the river, seeking a place to drink. Midas leaned on the bar front and marveled at the establishment his grandfather had built. True to his grandfather's foresight, no matter who passed through the town, everyone needed a place to unwind. Regardless of the amount of gold in their hands, there was always enough to spare for a drink at the end of a hard day. The aged wooden stairs groaned as a woman descended, lifting her dress to navigate the creaking steps. Passing through the swinging door beside the bar, she joined her husband, who had just finished explaining to a traveler, cradling a glass of gin, why cues were currently unavailable for the pool table. The woman flashed a smile and placed a hand on Midas's shoulder. "Don't you think it's much more pleasant here without the ruckus of those balls clashing into one another?" Mary asked. "As long as it doesn't mean switching to wooden mugs, 'cause you can't stand the clinking of glassware." Her husband chuckled, leaning in for a kiss. Chapter 2. It took another day for the wind to calm down enough for people to safely leave their houses or wherever they happened to be when the sandstorm hit. One such person was the young son of Midas and his wife Mary. The boy had been mostly confined to his room over the past 2 days, practicing his handwriting and playing with the ragdoll puppets his mother had purchased from a traveling merchant some time ago. Zacharias had already left the tavern to attend the nearby schoolhouse, and Midas had already begun to serve the customers of the bar below, so it was Mary who bent down to pick up the tiny sewn figures of a sheriff and a robber that lay on the wooden floorboards. Like her son, Mary was weary of being confined within the walls of the tavern, but she understood that the storm would bring a boost to the business, and a few extra gold pieces never hurt. She blew a kiss to Midas and hurried out into the warm morning, the clear blue sky welcoming her as she made her way across town to the sheriff's department. She had been working as a sheriff's secretary for a few years now, starting shortly after giving birth to her son. Sheriff Hiram was a kind and honest man, hard-working and reliable. Granger may have been a small town, but as a stopover for many travelers, it wasn't uncommon for trouble to arise from outsiders. The sheriff's building was a quaint wooden structure that had once been bright red, but had worn down to a warm brown, not unlike the wood beneath the remaining paint. As the front door swung open, Sheriff Hiram greeted her warmly. "Glad to have you back, Mrs. Ulrich," holding the door to let Mary shake the dust from her dress before entering. "What's on the docket today, Hiram, sir?" Mary inquired, settling into her desk with an air of anticipation.
Well, I was hoping you could be the one to tell me that, miss. Seems I've lost my journal again, and I swear on my mother it's not on my desk this time,
the sheriff confessed, his cheeks tinged with a faint blush. After a moment of contemplation, Mary began rifling through a series of notes on her desk. Wednesday 4th. Let's see. Ah, yes. You have a meeting tomorrow with Madam Wisson to discuss the theft of candles from last week's sermon. She paused, glancing up at the sheriff. It's rather absurd what people will do for a few extra coins nowadays, isn't it, sir?
Well, Mrs. Orrick, can you blame them? These are tough times, after all. People gotta carve out their destiny or watch it wither away in this ghost town, the sheriff remarked with a wistful smile, his pause hanging in the air a moment too long. I'd better get back to work. Would you kindly ensure I'm not disturbed for the next few hours?
Of course, sir, Mary replied cheerfully as the sheriff retreated into his office, firmly closing the door behind him. Lost in thought, she couldn't shake off Hiram's peculiar perspective on theft, especially from a church. It seemed rather unconventional for someone in his position. This moment lingered in her mind for a moment or two. Sheriff Hiram was well liked in town, but over the past few months, Mary Ann had developed a nagging suspicion about him. She despised being suspicious of others. Perhaps she considered it akin to gossip, a hobby she never got that much into. Nevertheless, a gut feeling told her that something was hidden behind the honest sheriff. It all began on a Thursday, an unusual day for the sheriff to be absent from the office. He had spent the afternoon with an old acquaintance, as he described, and the next morning he strolled into the building wearing a gleaming new silver timepiece. In all the time that she knew the sheriff, not once did he have anything that shone. He said it was a lesson his father taught him. A polished penny always draws eyes, but you'll spend half your days dodging gazes, and the other half buffing it to keep folks staring. Where on earth did you find a piece like that? Mary asked, attempting not to pry, but feeling irresistibly curious about the item.
Isn't it just lovely?
The sheriff beamed.
It was a gift I received yesterday evening from a new friend.
He lifted the small watch for a better view and popped open the metal front to reveal the beautiful face ticking away. A new friend? But what about the old acquaintance you left early to meet with yesterday? Mary asked sincerely, though the sheriff's momentary expression made it seem he thought it was more accusatory.
Ah, yes, well, what I mean to say is that after a gift like this, we could hardly be called acquaintances anymore, right?
The sheriff chuckled to himself, then awkwardly turned toward his office, his ears turning a cherry red as he hurriedly stuffed the pocket watch into his coat. As time passed, the sheriff adorned himself with more jewels and gems, and Mary stopped asking questions, while Hiram remained tight-lipped about the matter. One week, he appeared with 2 new gold rings tightly wrapped around his fingers, only to replace them with a chain necklace the next day. His dusty old coat was swapped for a dark blue velvet blazer, which was quickly retired when Hiram realized how much the red dust would ruin it. Finally, the old copper 5-pointed sheriff badge was discarded, replaced by one made with polished steel so bright that he was forced to remove it during daily patrols to avoid blinding people walking down the street. Chapter 3. A few months passed and this mysterious behavior continued. Large crates started appearing on the footsteps of the sheriff's building. They were unmarked except for large, fragile stamps and wax-sealed envelopes addressed to the sheriff himself. These deliveries became so frequent that the sheriff hired 2 extra staff members solely to carry these crates from the porch and into the office whenever they arrived. Despite his general aversion to others entering his office, especially uninvited, the sheriff made it abundantly clear that no one should disturb him without prior notice. A printed sign on the door was a testament to this, reading, "Knock before entering," and when flipped, "Not in the office. Book appointment with secretary." One morning, following the delivery of a new crate to the station, Mary approached the office to deliver the monthly newspaper to the sheriff. The front page featured a grainy picture of a large, battered man slumped in a jail cell, and the bold serif font proclaimed, "Leader of Devil's Mark Rebellion, Zeus, captured with public execution date to be announced." Engrossed in this exciting news, Mary forgot to knock. Pushing past the door, she glanced up from the paper to discover one of the larger crates cracked open, revealing what seemed to be a pristine casino machine. Mary had only encountered one of these machines during a short vacation to Sagebrush on her honeymoon. Places that house casino machines or any other kinds of mechanical devices easily repurposed for fraud were often very carefully overseen, so apart from the few small towns that advertised themselves as fortune destinations, it was rare to see a machine like this so far outside the capital. The machine sat flush in the crate as if the box had been constructed around it to prevent any pieces from rattling during transport. Brass levers and buttons framed a small window displaying reels, each adorned with different gems or ores: iron, steel, bronze, silver, and of course, the alluring jackpot of gold. The words "Wild West Wager" were neatly printed on the white ivory panel, currently being wiped down by the Sheriff Hiram with a wet rag. The creaking of the door was enough to send a shiver down Hiram's spine. By the time he turned to face the intruder, however, he found himself alone in the room, the door firmly shut, and the monthly newspaper neatly folded on his desk. Overnight, it seemed like the sheriff's friendly demeanor toward Mary had vanished, replaced by spending countless additional hours in his office. The door handle had been switched for a brass lock, allowing him to secure himself inside, and a small paper slip facilitated Mary's delivery of important documents without the need of opening the door. Every time a new crate arrived, the sheriff briefly opened the door to allow it in, and Mary would watch as the two attempting to move it left with the distinct sound of a few extra gold coins jingling in their pockets. Chapter 4. Midas sensed something as he gazed into the deep green eyes of his wife from across the bar. It had been an unusually quiet week at the Placer's Fill, with most townsfolk heading out to witness the public execution of the rebel leader known as Zeus, a spectacle that had left the tavern eerily deserted. Mary sat, spinning a solitary gold coin on the table, her emerald eyes fixated on its hypnotic rotation. Breaking the silence, she posed a question, her gaze still fixed on the twirling token. "What would you do for gold?" Mary inquired, her words hanging in the air. Caught off guard by the unexpected query, Midas simply raised his brow, following her gaze to the coin. "Why do men traverse the world, forsaking all they have and all they were, all for the allure of gold? If they weren't lacking feathers, I'd swear they were crows, forever seeking the next shiny thing." Midas took a moment to realize the humor in her words was misplaced and attempted to save his chuckle by clearing his throat. He sat with the question, not entirely sure if Mary had even hoped for an answer, but decided to give one nonetheless. "Gold is a symbol of hope, my dear. A belief that things might just take a turn for the better. I charge 4 gold pieces for a pint, not because I relish the chill of metal in my hands, but because I savor the warmth of your smile, knowing we can keep on living and that, perhaps, tomorrow will be brighter than today." Chapter 5. It was a cold night when Midas found himself alone at a table in the dimly lit tavern. The cold desert wind howled against the bolted door, a feeble barrier against the harsh night. Midas, a bartender who seldom indulged, now nursed a shallow glass of brandy to stave off the chill that seemed to seep into his bones, making the hair on his arms stand at attention. Mary and Zacharias had retired for the night, but Midas knew Mary lay wide awake in her bed, as he would often find her nowadays. The rough wind outside battered the sturdy wooden walls of the Placer's Fill, and Midas was pulled from his peachy reflection in the puddle of brandy in his cup. A sudden thump, a familiar sound, the back door thrown open by the unforgiving winds after someone had neglected to secure it. Cursing under his breath, Midas rose and made his way to the rear of the building, unsurprised to see the door ajar, but shocked, instead to see it swing crookedly, nearly torn from its hinges. His panic was delayed by the alcohol coursing through his veins. Midas turned just in time to hear a violent crash and the agonizing scream of his child from upstairs. The family bedroom door stood wide open, revealing a scene that froze Midas in terror. 2 imposing figures loomed within, one gripping Zacharias tightly, the other wielding a shotgun pointed menacingly at Mary, who sat battered and bloodied, thick red running down her forehead. Before Midas could react, the gun discharged, filling the room with fiery sparks. Like an internal explosion, Midas felt his chest erupt with a torrent of energy, a swirling cocktail of rage and misery tearing through the seams of his being, raw, primal, and overwhelming. Without a second thought, he charged the gunman, intent on wresting the weapon away. His fist reached the gun just before it could be fired again, achieving little more than pushing the assailant back before being flung across the room, landing beside his lifeless wife, her white nightgown now stained crimson. Midas turned to face Mary one last time, hearing Zacharias' desperate screams for his father, but the gun remained quiet, the room unchanged, except for the sound of a child being thrown to the floor as the second assailant made a hasty retreat. Looking up, Midas stared down the barrel of a shotgun being held by a man who now stood motionless, frozen like a statue. Unable to comprehend the gravity of the situation, father and son reached out to each other in desperate need of solace. Zacharias clung to his father, his small frame trembling with fear and confusion, seeking refuge from the storm of emotions overwhelming them both. Midas held his son tight, his warm touch transforming into cold hardness. "It's okay. I'm here," Midas whispered through a soft tremble. But when he looked up at his son, he was met with a golden statuette of a child, solid gold tears streaming down his face. Coyotes howl 'neath the blood-red moon. Midas weeps in a cold saloon. Coin in his hands, heart turned to stone. Voices once echoed, now he's alone. Chapter 6. Find Midas in a ghostly town, an empty throne for a gilded crown. It was a dry summer in the small town. Desert winds whipped up in the late afternoon, blowing a current of red dust through the main road. The once bustling auburn-red sheriff's department building quivered as the relentless red dust hammered against its now battered shutters. An old wooden sign, once held in place by iron chains, now lay dormant at the open door of the tavern. The deserted streets echoed with the distant howls of the wind as every door and window throughout the town remained unlocked or open, swinging in the wind. The dark red dust enveloped the town, obscuring the view of anything more than a few meters in front. 5 men emerged through the cloud of sand, each with their hats slouched down over their eyes, and bandanas pulled up to shield their mouths and noses from the swirling dust. After a few moments, the rest of their bodies broke through the cloud of sand as well. They wore light armor on their chest and shoulders, each holding a weapon in their hands, 2 shotguns, 2 muskets, and the leader in the front with his pistol drawn. They stalked through the empty town until they reached the open doorway of the Placer's Fill. The place stood silent, occupied only by a lone figure slumped over the bar, their head hanging limp. From a distance, the approaching men couldn't discern if the figure was even still alive. The leader holstered his pistol and entered the tavern, calling out, "Midas!" The name stirred something in the body, which slowly started to rise and turn to face the group. The man they saw was one they had never seen before and hoped they would never have to see again. He wore a full beard and shaggy hair that fell to his shoulders, covering most of his face, except for 2 deep eye sockets. One housed a bloodshot brown eye, devoid of any thoughts, while the other was missing, replaced by a golden marble. The marble floated in the socket, holding frozen golden tears at its side as if they had run halfway down his face before solidifying. He wore a pair of trousers and a shirt with all but one button undone, revealing a web of gold spreading across his body. The golden strands originated from his hands, whose shiny yellow fingertips caught the sunlight with unmatched radiance. The man said nothing, only staring at the group of invaders in his home. "We just want to talk, Midas." The leader cautiously approached, hands raised to show no aggression, yet poised to reach for his weapon if necessary. "Were you aware that you're a wanted man? A fellow by the name of Hiram has quite a large bounty on your head, and I'm here to claim it." Midas turned away, back to whatever occupied him at the bar. "What's the price?" he growled. "My weight in gold," the man replied, reaching for his pistol and firing. Simultaneously, Midas raised his hand behind his back, the bullet bouncing off the metallic palm and back into one of the men near the doorway, who crumpled to the floor in pain. The leader let his pistol fall to the floor. "What are you?" He reached out a hand to touch the man at the bar to make sure he was there and not just a mirage or a trick of the light. Midas sighed as the warm touch turned cold and hard on his shoulder. The men by the door screamed and fled in terror while Midas went back to spinning a single gold coin on the bar, his tired eyes fixated on its hypnotic rotation.